Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 14 of Heavy Hitters, the review series of course for the SUVs, trucks, 4x4s and crossovers of GT6. And in this particular episode we're featuring one of the very few competition spec 4x4s or trucks that are on the game. It is the Rally Raid version of Toyota's RSC concept. Now this is what we would call a Polyphony Digital Original, which is basically a fancy way of saying made up, because this car does not exist in real life. The concept though is pretty cool. Take a vehicle which is already a semi-performance vehicle and turn it into a competition spec rally machine, with one of the most iconic liveries ever seen in rallying. Sounds pretty good. And on the surface of things, it just gets better and better really, until you see one thing in particular: the price. This car costs 1 million credits. Now for an exotic vehicle like a supercar, that's not that much on this game, but for an SUV or a truck or a crossover, that is a lot. That makes it the second most expensive SUV in the game, second only to the fastest SUV in the game, the Pikes Peak Quattro from Audi. So this car has a lot to live up to if its price is anything to go by. Now thankfully for the most part it really does live up to what it should be as a competition spec machine. Now we have of course already reviewed the road version, as it were, of the RSC concept earlier on in this series, and you may recall that I said that the handling, although competitive, can be a little bit temperamental depending on what tuning you apply to the vehicle. This car though, I'm happy to say, is worlds apart from the standard RSC. The handling is so far superior to the standard RSC that it almost doesn't even feel like the same base vehicle, which is a good thing when you're paying 1 million credits. But the change between the RSC and this version of the RSC is so drastic that I would say this is possibly the most highly manoeuvrable SUV, especially on twisty tracks, in the game. This car can out-handle even vehicles like the old-school Mitsubishi Pajero, and considering how small that car is, that's pretty impressive. Now, ironically enough, this car isn't really much of a heavy hitter. It's actually the lightest SUV or truck in the game. It weighs exactly 1 tonne, or 1,000 kilos. That's 110 kilos lighter than the standard RSC. Now to balance out that huge advantage, it does unfortunately have slightly less power than the standard RSC at 544 horsepower fully tuned and a pretty impressive 525 pound-feet of torque. So the power to weight ratio per tonne is pretty easy to work out, it's 544. And the PP on this car when fully tuned is perhaps a lower than you might expect, 579, surprising perhaps for a competition spec vehicle. But we still have to come back to that price, because 1 million credits is a lot of money for an SUV. And whereas with the Pikes Peak Quattro, you can understand why it costs that much. It's the fastest SUV in the game. It makes sense that it would cost that much. It has almost unbeatable acceleration, literally the highest top speed of its class, great handling, great looks. It's a concept in the ultimate sense and uses that in the most creative way possible. And it's just a good car all round. This vehicle is lower in some ways in spec than the regular version, cannot be painted, and in terms of straight line performance, I'm sorry to say it, but it's just not that great. The top speed is around 200, which makes it a lot slower than the standard RSC. The acceleration, although not bad, could never keep up with the regular RSC because obviously that version can have NOS, whereas this one cannot. So what's the verdict? Well, 1 million credits is very steep, and I would say that this car is categorically not worth 1 million credits. However, that is how much it costs, so would I recommend actually buying one? Well, this is a very niched vehicle. it's almost in a class of its own. The only real rivals it has are the two Mitsubishi Rally Raid models, but they are of course real cars. Those are still arguably its main rivals though, so how does it compare to them? Well, they're both a lot cheaper for a start, so that doesn't exactly stack up well against it. In terms of performance, this car isn't that much better than them, if better at all, apart from handling. And overall, to be honest, I would only recommend this car to someone who is specifically looking for a competition spec Rally Raid SUV, or if you are so much of a fan of the regular RSC that you just have to buy this one. If you don't fall into one of those two groups, I wouldn't really recommend splurging 1,000,000 credits on the car, because although it's not bad, it's not 1,000,000 credits good. I would say this car is worth maybe 500,000. That would make it 200 grand more than the regular car, and that would be about right, I think. So overall, that's it for this episode. I'll see you guys next time. And as always, thanks for watching.